really aimed at improving the well-being of young children in the country. We were very pleased over the last year to have helped move forward on expanding the child tax credit, reauthorizing the federal home visiting program, and increasing funding for quality child care. But to further help strengthen American families, the pair also recommended that the country really look at adopting a national paid leave program. In 2018, we have started a new effort to really think about and explore what that program could look like. We are pleased to have two members of our paid family leave task force here today, Senators Chris Dodd and Senator Santorum. I'm sure they will regale you with stories, but I will just note that they're uniquely suited to help us with this conversation today, because 25 years ago, they were on opposite sides of the Family and Medical Leave Act debate. But before we hear from them, I want to introduce our first panel. We are really thrilled to have Ivanka Trump here. She's a senior advisor to the president and a strong advocate for paid family leave. And Adrienne Schweer. Adrienne joined the BPC earlier this year as a fellow focused on paid leave. I have learned over the last 6 or 7 months that she is extensively and extremely passionate about the topic. She's worked on it throughout her entire career, whether it's within the Department of Defense, on the Hill, or outside as an advocate. And I will just note that she, as you might notice, she and her husband are expecting their 4th child. So I think this is her way and their way of demonstrating their personal commitment to the issue and test driving paid leave policies throughout the city. So we're really, really happy to have her here. And we have a really packed program for you this morning. We have 3 panels, so please use your index cards to submit questions up for each panel. And thank you for joining us. And with that, Adrienne, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Julie. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to be here. We're excited to have our first set, Ms. Trump here joining us. You are an entrepreneur, an author, a business executive, and in your new role, you are advisor to the president, leading a lot of the work around education and economic empowerment for women and their families. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Americans are struggling to balance the needs of work and family. Many factors contribute to that struggle and the difficulty in finding and affording quality childcare and the need to juggle multiple jobs. Why does paid leave elevate the administration's working families agenda, and why do you think the federal government has a role?
Well, thank you, and thank you for convening this very impressive group of thought leaders, lawmakers, past and present, and engaging in a conversation that's critically important and one that is really starting to achieve much needed momentum. I think that momentum has long existed in the country at large, but momentum is now occurring on the Hill to pass a paid leave policy, and that is exciting. And conversations like this and bipartisan gatherings like this are instrumental in keeping that momentum going and driving solutions. Going back to your question about how this works into our larger working family agenda, the workforce has changed dramatically in recent decades. Women now comprise 47% of the workforce. In the majority of homes with 2 parents, both are working, and those are homes with minor children in them. They're in 40% of American homes. Women are the primary breadwinners. So the world has shifted, and our policies need to reflect that shift. There is a ton of research to support why paid leave is just good policy. It supports family cohesion, family bonding. It's important for maternal health. It's important for infant health. Sadly, amongst the developed world, we have the highest rate of SIDS of any country, which is really devastating when you think about it, and truly preventable, and why policies such as paid leave and paid parental leave are critical from a health perspective. But also when you think about our future and our future tax revenue base, we have some of the lowest fertility rates in recorded history in this country. And we don't want to go the way of many other developed countries around the world where there aren't enough children to support the social programs that exist. So when we think about working families and we think about how the family structure has evolved, when we think about how the workplace has evolved, when we think about their real need for relief, I'm very proud of a lot of the things we've been able to accomplish this year. A couple of them were done through tax reform. Of course, doubling the standard deduction was very valuable, whether you're a single parent or as a family. The child tax credit is incredibly important, but in addition to the child tax credit, maintaining important credits, such as the adoption credit, the earned income tax credit, the child and dependent care tax credit, these important credits that support hardworking American families. Additionally, there was a dependent care credit added as part of tax reform to support those families that are caring for adult dependents, of which we know there are many, and plays into the broader conversation of paid leave and who it should cover. So I think a lot of great accomplishments, including one on parental leave, were enacted as part of tax reform. So Senator Fisher introduced the first ever national credit for employers to incentivize those, especially for their middle to lower income workers, to offer paid family leave at their organization. So while we think that is not expansive enough and will not cover everyone, it's certainly a good start to incentivizing behavior from the private sector, and that's something that's been tremendously valuable. I think when you think about the broader context as well, of the working family agenda, I'm really proud of the fact that in the omnibus, and there were many areas we agreed and were bipartisan, and many areas of disagreement as part of that proposal. But one of the things we pushed really hard was the largest ever expansion of the child care and development block grants that actually go to the states. So it went from $3.8 billion to $5.2 billion. And that will be enormously beneficial to working parents to offset the enormously high cost of childcare. So in roughly 50% of this country, geographically speaking, childcare is now the single largest family expense, even exceeding the cost of housing. So this is unsustainable. It's not good for our children, who oftentimes are forced into less than ideal, less than stimulating circumstances because their parents can't afford better alternatives. It's not good for working families who are dropping out of the workforce because they're unable to adequately provide for their children. So I think thinking about this holistically, thinking about the importance of paid family leave as one component of a broader working family agenda, and supporting the reality of what the modern family looks like by thinking through the costs of childcare and providing working parents the relief they need in the form of credits, whether it's EITC, the doubled child tax credit, or so many others that we've been working so hard on. So I'm excited that we're advancing this conversation, as in many cases it's long overdue. And again, I thank you for having me here to discuss some of these things today.
Thanks. One thing you talked about was opportunity to actually move things on the agenda. And we are living in unprecedented times of political divide. What makes you think that now is the time, or that that the Hill and the administration have an opportunity to forge bipartisan consensus and really consider paid family leave?
Because I'm an optimist. That's the only way you get things done. So the last 17 months, I've spent a lot of time engaging people in dialogue around the merit of paid family leave and why this is good, smart policy that incentivizes the right behavior. We want people to maintain their attachment to the workforce, and we want people to be part of well-bonded families. We want to protect our most vulnerable, our children, our adult dependents. So there are so many arguments for the merit of this policy, and I really spent a lot of time in one-on-one conversations articulating those. And I'm excited because I feel that there is momentum where we're moving beyond the merit to the how. And that's where people will start to rip each other up, and that's life. I've learned that in DC. It's not a city that really rewards compromise. It's easier, politically speaking, to stick to the talking points and not meet in the middle. But I think we are seeing movement. I think the fact that Senate Finance hosted a hearing, Senator Cassidy, on the topic of paid family leave in and of itself is a major step. The fact for the first time in history, the president, a Republican president, put paid family leave and allocation into his budget, in both budgets, the first and this most recent one. And the fact that it was mentioned in both the joint address to Congress and this year's State of the Union indicates that this is a priority for the administration. And I think we see lawmakers on both sides of the aisle responding. So is it going to be hard? Absolutely. If it was easy, it would have been done 25 years ago when FMLA was passed. So it is going to be hard. And I am realistic about the time frame, and I'm realistic about the difficulty. But one of the things that I leave every conversation I have with lawmakers, regardless of whether they're Republicans or Democrats, is don't shut down the conversation as it's gaining momentum. Continue to talk about it. Reach out, because while there are many different policies proposed, we need a bipartisan solution if this is actually going to be signed into law. So I'm happy to sit here and talk about the merits of paid leave. And I think as a country we need to be doing that, because that's going to advance the conversation. But for our lawmakers, this is an opportunity to move off the talking points and to engage meaningfully and to engage in discrete conversations where we can see if there's a way to find compromise and if there's a way to craft legislation that will garner the votes that will actually land it on the president's desk. And I think the time is long overdue for that to happen. But I do believe that we're in the middle of a process that is leading us in that direction.
Thank you. And thank you everybody in the audience who submitted questions. We really appreciate it. We're going to take a couple here, and feel free when you're submitting questions to add your name and your organization. We'd love to acknowledge you and find out where you are. This one does not have a name, but I'm going to read it anyway because it looks great. What feedback are you getting from Republican members of Congress on this idea of paid family leave?
It's evolving, and it depends who you speak to, just like with Democrats. You know, there's various levels of enthusiasm depending where on the spectrum you are, how comprehensive it is, and what the pay for is. And I think that's where we're getting into more substantive dialogue. If we can get to a place where we agree that it's time for paid leave and it's time for the country to pass a national policy, which is what the president's called for, then we can get into a discussion, okay, what's the best way to pay for this? How comprehensive should it be? And that's where both sides will need to meet in the middle and figure out what's viable and also what's sustainable. So I think that education on this topic across the spectrum is positive. I think it makes people a lot more enthusiastic. Actually, today, the focus of this morning's cabinet meeting, which I'm leaving here to head over to, will be workforce development and vocational education, skills training. With such a robust economy, we are particularly focused on bringing people off the sidelines who have been outside of the workforce, who want that opportunity to work and participate in a meaningful way. So I think actually paid leave really plays into that, because we're trying to maintain attachment to those already in our workforce and not incentivize them to leave it and not come back, or not create a challenge to their reentry because they have inadequate childcare, or because they didn't have job security, because they were working at a small business and weren't entitled to even unpaid leave. 1 in 4 mothers in this country returns to work after 10 days because they simply can't afford not to, and they can't risk losing their job. So I do think that the more we educate, the better. And the more we come together discreetly, quietly, and without judgment of various proposals, the better. And so I urge everyone in this room just to keep the dialogue going, maintain an open mind, and evaluate with interest new and fresh ideas that are brought to the table, because that may be the beginning of of real forward movement in a bipartisan way.
That's a great point. And we're lucky to be joined today by two of our co-chairs, Senator Dodd and Senator Santorum. And as the task force is looking at paid family leave, and as I've looked at it over time, it's been interesting to hear Republicans and Democrats on the Hill kind of coalesce. A few years ago, Republicans were talking mostly about tax credits and savings plans, and today they're talking about an up to 12-week social insurance program for parental leave, and Democrats have long been talking about a very similar proposal. But looking across the spectrum at what options are out there is very much in the DNA of our task forces and thinking through all the options. So let me get to this other question by someone from our audience, Marjorie Robertson. Are you here, Marjorie? Oh, perfect. She asks, many employers provide disability leave for maternity and additional family leave for bonding, and private market insurers sell these benefits. Have you thought about supporting legislative solutions or proposals that encourage private solutions like this?
Well, absolutely. And I think that was one of the elements of tax cuts and tax reform that many people don't yet know about, but is going to be very beneficial. We would love the private sector to do it. I think what we know is for small business, a mandate is incredibly hard. They're struggling to get by as is, and they can't afford to subsidize wages for an employee who's out of the workforce if you run a small operation, have 3 employees, and have to hire somebody to fill that position. So it's actually one of the great arguments for a national program to help our small businesses so that they can compete with the larger businesses who are disproportionately likely to offer a more robust benefit. But I think any type of incentive we can have to the private sector to do it, because they'll probably do it better, and they'll do it more generously, and they'll tailor it more specifically to the needs of their workers, which is great. Different businesses have different workers who value different things. So we are strongly in favor, but I don't view it as mutually exclusive. I don't think it will give, I don't foresee in the near future getting to a place where the private sector takes care of this problem. Unfortunately, what we see today is that only 15% of Americans have access to paid family leave. And when you think about lower income workers, that drops down to 6%. So the people who need it the most are the people who are less likely to have it. And that's what we're looking to solve for and that's where the majority of our energy is focused as we think about a national program.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for submitting your questions. They're great. This one is from Nikki Schwab, and she says, because of the toxic political environment, are you having trouble engaging Democrats? And which Democrats have been most enthusiastic about coming to the table?
It depends which Democrat. So, no, I took a lot of flack once when I said I don't view myself as a political animal, and I really don't. I didn't come down to Washington with that background. I care deeply about policy. That's what motivated me to change course in my life and move to the city and try and advance discussion and ultimately results on issues that I care very deeply about. I care a lot less about the politics of an issue. I care a lot more about bringing people together and trying to find the right solution. And I have really built very rewarding relationships with lawmakers on both sides of the aisle who feel the same way. And it took some time. You have to, especially in an environment like this, you have to work to earn trust, and that's appropriate. And I've worked very hard to do that. And I don't want to call out names because actually a lot of the people who have engaged with me in the most substantive way have done so because they know that I'm not going to violate their confidence and share their perspectives publicly. They've given me advice from a strategic perspective on who we can bring over, who's most willing to compromise, who generally is the most thoughtful and dynamic in their thinking, and who gets things done. It's really easy to be in this town and not get things done, and to stick with paid family leave is so important, this is why it's so important, and do nothing. And we're not interested in that. We're interested in getting things done. So I'm interested in finding those lawmakers on both sides of the aisle who share that interest. And when they want to talk about their discussions with me, I'm sure they will. But I've never been one to do that, whether it's at my home, at my office, or oftentimes at their offices or elsewhere on the Hill. I really value the fact that they're willing to engage and roll up their sleeves and work with the administration on issues that they agree with, even if there are others they dramatically disagree with, because that's what it's all about. You know, we have to lean in where we agree, and when we have to stand up where we disagree, and that's good and that's healthy and that's part of the process.
Thank you. I think we only have time for one more question. So this is from Lizzie Naylor. Are you here, Lizzie, somewhere? Over there. Hi, Lizzie. Thank you. She asks, why stop at paid parental leave? Why not include family and medical leave as well, as 75% of FMLA users do not use FMLA for parental leave. They use it for medical or family leave.
I think it's a great question. I think that caregiving leave is very important. I think when we think about a national policy, I'm motivated by what we can get done. So there seems to be the most bipartisan support for parental leave. With that said, I think that the position, my position is that I'm very open-minded to all forms of leave, and maybe that doesn't take the form of a national policy. Maybe that's designed, I mentioned earlier as part of tax reform, that there's a dependent care credit for adult dependents, for families who are caregivers for those. So I think we can be creative in terms of how this is designed. But I agree. I think there are strong arguments and there's tremendous merit to talking about the larger plan. My concern is that we have sat at 0 weeks of paid leave for 25 years. So perfect shouldn't stand in the way of getting something really important and meaningful done for American workers. And ultimately, that will be for lawmakers to decide. What is the best policy? What will they be willing to give on? Where will they be willing to go? And I'm seeking to support that so that we can get something done. But it's a very fair question, and it's an important one to be considering, not just through this discussion, but through all our actions, administrative and legislatively, how we support those providing care for adult dependents. And we know the deep emotional toll that care takes. We also know the incredible financial toll that takes on families. And then there are many families who are sandwiched right in the middle and taking care of children and taking care of adult dependents. So it's enormously taxing and challenging, and it's something we should be coming together to figure out a way to holistically address.
Well, thank you for your time, and thank you everybody for the engaged discussion. We appreciate you being here at BPC.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Really appreciate it. All right, everyone.